Hey guys, my name is Rishi Desai. I'm a pediatric infectious disease attending at Stanford, and I'm also the chief medical officer at Osmosis. So, first off, I want to welcome you guys to this broadcast. This will be actually recorded, and we're going to post this so that if you miss parts of it, or if you need to just leave kind of partway through, you want to catch the rest of it, you can see the recorded version. You can email us or send us a message through Intercom, and we can get back to you with the link. So uh, without any further ado, let me just kind of dive right in. I wanted to kind of screen share a few things and kind of show and demo a little bit to make sure that this all feels very hands-on and easy to follow. So I'm just going to let you see my screen here. And let's just close that up. There we go. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly send you to a PowerPoint I put together. This is a PowerPoint. I'm just going to start from the beginning, entitled How to Prepare for USMLE Step 1 and the COMLEX. So for those of you that are taking the DO or that are on the DO path, you might have seen we recently put out an osteopathic video explaining what osteopathic medicine is. For those of you that are interested, you can check that out. And for those of you that are on the MD path, we have many videos around kind of curriculum that would be relevant for you too. So this is kind of how I began thinking about USMLE Step 1 is I wanted to kind of think, okay, the first question is always, when do you want to start preparing? It's always a time question. So let's just start with that. There's Step 1, and that's be a good student. And anytime you're admitted to medical school, you're kind of inundated with so many responsibilities. So this is kind of the 5 to 20 month window before you take the Step 1 exam or before the COMLEX. And what I want to stress at this point, when you're just starting or getting into the groove of medical school, is you want to make sure you're setting yourself up well to succeed on that exam. So on that exam and the lead up to the exam, you're going to need certain things. Those things are going to be a note system where you can kind of easily find your notes and find information that you used to know really well. You want to be able to access it quickly. And to do that, you're going to want some sort of a digital system to annotate your notes and find them or search for them easily. These days, just think about the fact that when you're looking for an email, how easy and nice it is to go to the magnifying glass and type in a keyword and have Google serve up kind of a set of emails out of things that you're probably looking for. Imagine if you had to read through all of your emails to find the one that you want. It's impossible, right? And in every aspect of our lives, we use a search function. And so for notes that you're taking for medical school, I really want you to think of it no differently. Imagine if you didn't have a good digital system to search for your notes, how hard that would be. And frankly, that's how it has been for many, many decades, right? We had kind of handwritten systems, and that's not a great way to be doing this. So I want to be very clear, if you have a digital system, that's always best. And you might be wondering, what the heck do I mean by a digital system? A digital system is really anything that allows you to kind of keep your notes for class on a platform. Osmosis does that, for example, where you can kind of have your PowerPoint slides, and right next to you can kind of keep track of your own little notes in the form of flashcards. You can kind of keep all that tallied up right in one place rather than having to search for it in many, many different places. So that's key. And kind of part and parcel with that is this idea of spaced repetition. Now, a lot of you may know the term spaced repetition, may have an idea of what it means. I'm going to give you my version of spaced repetition, which is that anytime you're learning a fact, you could say medical school is a body of facts, and maybe that's 20,000 facts or factoids. Those facts you have to remember as you go through and take Step 1, and ideally, or you imagine, many of those facts would be helpful well beyond that. But as you know, many of those facts are not. So those facts end up becoming a big part of the study for the exam. And the same goes for the COMLEX. So what you want to be able to do is, that you're going to forget some of these facts as time goes on. It's just a natural part of our kind of working memory. We lose the stuff that we're not using every day. And so a platform that kind of spaces things out and says, hey, do you remember fact number 1? If so, it'll kind of give it to you later. If you don't, it'll give it to you sooner. So kind of making sure that the facts you need are coming up much sooner, and the facts you don't are coming up later. And that spaced repetition is impossible to do with flashcards, right? You can't just create multiple stacks of flashcards and know which stack goes with what. So this is a much more effective way, letting a platform kind of give you the information you need when you need it. So that's step one. Be a good student. Use a digital system for note-taking. Use a platform that helps you with spaced repetition, that keeps you kind of on top of the information you need to know so you don't forget information. That's a lot of wasted effort. That's what you should be doing kind of for the 5 to 20 months well before the exam date, right? So let's move to step two. So step two is, let's see if I can, there we go, is 3 to 5 months before the exam. So this is when you're starting to use question banks, and there are a lot of questions about which question bank to use, and I recommend right now UWorld is probably the bank most people are going to be using. I strongly recommend you use it as well. The question often becomes, you know, do I use it once or do I go through the questions twice? Generally speaking, I love if people have time to go through the question banks at least twice. And then there's always the question of other question banks, and I love the Osmosis question bank. I think it's a great supplement to the UWorld question bank for a few reasons. Reason one is that there are tons of questions. You want something that is robust. You don't want just a few questions. Number two, the questions have main explanations that are framed the same way that the UWorld main explanations are framed in. And that's really where a lot of the learning is happening, is in the explanation itself. So just make sure you find some question bank to augment it, because you're going to eventually want to do kind of in the ballpark of about 5,000 questions. So you want to find enough questions to make sure you don't run out of questions near the end. All right. The third one, find learning resources to help you strengthen your knowledge of concepts. So around this time, you're going to start recognizing that there are certain areas where you're weaker and certain areas where you're stronger. So a great example would be embryology. A lot of us struggle with embryology. Another example might be EKGs. Maybe you don't feel great about your ability to read an EKG, or maybe that's always kind of one of those things that you cringe at when you see an EKG. So if there's an area like embryology or EKGs or renal pathology, for me, renal pathology was an area that I always struggled with as a med student. And now I feel much, much more confident with that as I've started seeing a lot more patients with those kind of issues. But if there's an area you struggle with, start finding resources that you think do a great job of helping you with that thing. And so I really think that that's an important thing to do in this kind of step two, 3 to 5 months before the exam. And by this point, you should kind of know where your strengths and weaknesses are. All right, I went back to step one. Step three is what I meant to do. So ramp up. So this is kind of 1 to 2 months before the exam. So this is where you're starting to really get into the grind. You might have a daily schedule. You might want to know kind of what my meal plans are going to be, who's doing your laundry. You might want to kind of figure out when you're going to hang out, when you're going to have fun with your friends, all those kind of things, because this is really when you're in the nitty-gritty of it, and where, you know, people kind of really either stress out and have a terrible time with STEP or COMLEX, or they actually have it all planned out and it works out really well. Now, it's important during this time to kind of determine your personal goal and what score you want to aim for. And I have a video out on this exact thing, and you can check it out on Osmosis. We have it posted. The key here is make sure you're being really realistic with yourself. It is important to do kind of practice exams, and that's going to help you identify a personal goal that's realistic, right? So make sure you do practice exams. The NBME has a few. You can also do some practice exams through other groups, including UWorld. So make sure you do them and identify what you think is a feasible jump. And to do that, you also want to know, of course, what's your exam date? How much time do you have? You know, I said 1 to 2 months. It's very different if you're 2 months out versus 1 month out. So exactly how far is your exam date from the time that you're taking these exams and setting your goal? And at this point, you have to be very disciplined and figure out exactly what you're going to do in terms of resources in your daily schedule, as we mentioned. So this is when you really want to kind of get into I guess the specifics of which resource you're going to tackle, which days you're going to use it, how many questions you're going to do, and all that kind of stuff. Step 4, crunch time. This is 1 week before the exam. So this is when you're really, really kind of ready to take the exam, your COMLEX or USMLE. And at this point, I would say you want to finish all your NBME exams, but by step 4, 1 week out. And you want to focus on information that's really heavy on memorization and light on concepts. Concepts in general, with learning theory, we know we can remember concepts for a longer period of time. And memorization heavy topics, let's say for you, that might be developmental milestones. That's a memorization heavy topic where it might not come natural. It might be, kind of arbitrary. Another one might be side effects of certain medications. That also can feel very arbitrary. Um, Bugs and drugs as a general class is very memorization heavy. So anything like that, you often want to kind of review in that last week and really focus on that. And then we've got step 5, the home stretch. This is the final day, one day, 24 hours before the exam. You usually want to relax and get yourself in a good mind frame. Prepare for the logistics, know where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, get a good night's rest, and do some power poses. If you're not sure what that is, I've demoed them in the video I referenced earlier. But basically, kind of getting yourself in a mood to really succeed, kind of feeling good about that success. So that's basically the 5 steps. Now I'm going to actually demo this. The whole idea was not to just kind of recant all this for you, but I want to demo this kind of play by play. So let me just kind of back out of this. Oh, actually, some bonus tips here before I run out. Remember, it's a marathon. Block out distractors like social media. For myself, I've used certain apps that kind of keep track of how often I'm referencing my phone in a day. Make sure you keep track of stuff like that so you don't overdo it with distractions. And it's always nice to kind of divide up the work into 25-minute power sessions. There's a lot of data around that, and 2-minute stretches. And of course, stay healthy and take care of yourself, because that's more important than anything else, especially your mental health. You want to make sure that you're sharp, you're feeling good, your mood is positive. So now let me actually back out, and I'll show you a couple of things that I wanted to kind of demo for you. This is just over now. That's actually my son you're seeing there. Let me pull this up. And we'll go to this screenshot. This is a screen of Osmosis's website. Now, this, just to kind of put you in the right frame of reference, these are videos that we have on various topics. This is kind of what you want to be looking at, let's say, 5 to 20 months out. So you've got a lot of time between now and step 1, now in COMLEX. You're sort of going through your classes, you're studying, you're a good student, you're trying to do your best. At a basic minimum, you want to make sure you kind of go through the science of learning videos that we have here. They're great. They go over a lot of basics that I think you'll find value out of, especially things like the testing effect, which, let's face it, that's exactly what this is kind of about, is the summative exam. But the testing effect talks about what we call formative exam, or formative questions. So really spend some time understanding how you learn, but also, and this is the key, kind of take a look at something like a library. So this is our library, and what I wanted to show you is, let's say I'm 5 to 20 months out, and I'm in class, and I'm in cardiovascular, and we're actually going through, and I'm just going to pluck out something like let's look at all these topics. So let's say I'm learning about pathophysiology, and specifically something around electrical conduction defects, and I want to learn more about AV block, right? So AV block is right here. I can click on that, and it'll give me a link to a video about, obviously, atrioventricular block. So the idea is that this is where you're learning. This is where I want you to spend a lot of time, really get into the details of it, understand kind of nuances of how AV block works. I'm just showing you kind of a quick little screen grab. Understand what it's defined by, what type 1, Mobitz versus Wenckebach is kind of going to be differentiated by. Understand kind of how to look at an EKG, using the EKG example we talked about. This is where you want to kind of dive in and go deep. And then you might actually want to do some questions, right? So add to the question queue, and you're just going to look in the top right and kind of see what happens here. Those numbers just popped up by 17 flashcards and 7 questions. And this, during that 5 to 20 month period, is where you want to be doing your flashcards. So I just added a bunch of flashcards today. Let's do a little quiz on these 54 flashcards. And earlier I was going to doing some lymphoma stuff. So blank is a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You can see I was just learning about EKGs, but it's forcing me to answer a question about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That might seem very weird. What does this have to do with step 1? The point is that when you've got a lot of time to step 1, I want you to get used to this idea of kind of interleaving your study practice. So doing different kinds of questions. And let's say I'm feeling lucky, adult T-cell lymphoma. So this is something that I wasn't thinking about 5 seconds ago, because that's when I was thinking about Wenckebach and Mobitz. But now it's kind of forcing my brain to switch gears. And this idea of switching gears, the people that do well on the STEP exam and COMLEX and the people that don't, one of the key differentiators is who can actually switch their brain from question to question really fluidly and who can't. And frankly, that's a skill you can't really learn in 1 month or 2 months, as you can probably guess, right? This is a skill you learn over a year or 2 years. So you really want to kind of get good at this and say, okay, I want to get really fantastic at switching gears, practicing one thing and then getting quizzed on something else and then flipping back and forth and just switching, very fluidly. So this is another question, and I can say feeling lucky, and this is about rank ligand, and let's say I missed this one, et cetera, et cetera. See, this is about renal cell carcinoma. Let's say I'm sure about this one, parathyroid hormone-related peptide. So you can see this is how I want you to study. And then you can also start diving around. So renal cell carcinoma, if I don't know what that is, I can go read about it, and then I can start watching a video about it. So that's the way the fluidity is going to get built up. So it feels very discontinuous, right? It feels like we started with Wenckebach. I started answering some questions about lymphoma. Next thing I know, we're learning about renal cell carcinoma. And before I know it, maybe an hour has passed or an hour and a half has passed. And that's a great, great, great way to learn because your body is just naturally flowing. You're just kind of seeing the connections. You're thinking, okay, abdominal mass, weight loss, fevers, high blood pressure. Wait a second, high blood pressure. That thing about EKGs had something about blood pressure. What was that connection again? Let me make sure I get that right in my head. So you're just constantly going back and forth, thinking about all the different connections in the physiology and the pathophysiology. So that's kind of how I want you to think about the first stage of learning about or preparing for step one. So let me just back out of this now. So back to our quiz, and let's back out of this and back to AV block. So that's essentially how you can use this. And again, you have our library, and you can see that the thousands of topics that you can kind of go with. So generally speaking, these are going to be served up with anything you're learning in class. But of course, you can kind of go solo, and you can kind of just dive around the way I'm diving around right here. So that's stage one or phase one of study. So now let's fast forward a little bit. Let's say you're already kind of in the heat of it. You've been studying for a while. You're now, at a point where you're ready for kind of that 3 to 5 month window, or let's say 2 to 5 month window. At that point, now we're kind of in this mode where you really want to kind of get ready for step one. You want to focus on the areas that you're weakest at. So this isn't that last couple of months. This is just before that. But at this point, you've been in medical school for a while, right? You know the stuff you're good at. You know the stuff you're not good at. So what I want you to do here is say, okay, what do I really feel is a weakness? So for me, as I said, a weakness would be renal pathophysiology if I was a first-year med student. So I'd go into the library, and this is how I would do it. A little differently than what I just showed you, but I'd go into renal, which I just had it open, and I'd say, okay, this is all our electrolyte disturbance stuff. And by the way, you might be noticing that we've got hyper and hyponatremia and all these other kind of electrolyte disorders. Some of this stuff we've released on YouTube. A lot of this stuff we haven't. So a lot of this stuff is actually only on Osmosis Prime if you want to watch these videos. But let's say I'm really curious about this hyponatremia video. What is that about? So I want to learn about this because I know this is an area of weakness. That's the kind of the bottom line. Actually, let me just dive in because I personally like hypokalemia better. So let me just go back and go to hypokalemia or hyperkalemia. And the reason I did that is just because I want to show you something really quick. So in hyper and hypokalemia, we've got these videos, and I'm just going to kind of, as I did before, I'm just going to scrub along. So we've got the physiology of kind of potassium balance. We've got all the different kind of ways you'd go hypokalemic, and then what happens in your kidneys in terms of aldosterone release, and all the way through to what happens with external balance shifts. So this is my video. I've watched it. Again, this is kind of 3 to 5 months out of my exam. How do I approach it differently? Well, here, I could ask 2 questions and 25 flashcards, which you saw what that did up here. And actually, just for argument's sake, let's just kind of look at these questions. Let me do a little question quiz. And actually, there we go. So this is a little question quiz I'm going to do. 65-year-old man comes into the emergency department because of abdominal pain. Well, I know I was just on hypokalemia, so I'm just going to say I'm sure. And oh, actually, you know what? This is a mixed up question. This is a question from hypercalcemia. So this is a good example where, let's say I got it wrong, hypokalemia. That's not what I was trying to show, but I'm going to show it anyway. There's a little wrong answer explanation and a major takeaway and a main explanation. This is actually what I think 3 to 5 months out, what you should be doing is focusing more on these kinds of clinical questions where it's always framed around a vignette. There's always going to be some sort of a clinical type question. Which of the following is most likely? Where it's asking you to diagnose something. It might ask you, it might ask you a basic science question, it might ask you something about the underlying mechanism, but ultimately it's always framed around some clinical vignette, which is exactly how the board's questions are. So these questions are really what you want to be focusing on kind of 3 to 5 months out. And I said, you want to aim for around 5,000 questions. I can tell you many people do many more questions than that. So some people will do 5,000 to 7,000. Some people do even more than that. Depends on how much time you have and how long it takes you to get through a question. But the key is, when you get something wrong, the way I just got this wrong about hypokalemia, you want to read the right answer explanation about hypercalcemia, but you also want to understand what it was about hypokalemia that made this wrong. So in this case, the ECG findings were not the ones that they described. Here they're talking about specifically shortened QT intervals and a positive deflection. And here they're saying hypokalemia usually causes an increased U wave and decreased T wave. So these are some key things you're going to keep in mind. And anything you get wrong, you want to make sure you take really copious notes on. So almost everyone that's done well on the USMLE and the COMLEX will tell you that it's all about taking notes on the stuff that you get wrong, as well as the stuff that you get right. And it's always great if you can identify the answer before even seeing the answer choices. So it's always nice if you can just kind of take an educated guess as to what you think it would be, and then look at the answer options and say, okay, I think I know why it's this answer. One step further, if you really want to kind of be a superhero about this, you can actually go in and say, okay, why is it not hypermagnesemia? What would I have to change about this vignette to make it hypermagnesemia without looking? And then, of course, you can look and say, okay, did I get it right? And say, okay, it was the absence of DTRs, bradycardia, and hypotension. So try to see if you could play these games with yourself where you're tweaking the question to see if you can get it right, identifying what about the wrong answers makes them wrong, and then going a step further and saying, what would you have to change about the vignette to make those wrong answers correct? All of that mental kind of gymnastics that you do is what you need to do to get yourself really well trained at that point, again, 3 to 5 months out of the exam. So backing out of this just for a moment, I want to show you one more thing, which is, again, rarely will someone say, you know what, I have a hard time with hypokalemia. They'll say, I have a hard time with electrolyte disturbances in general, right? Keeping hypercalcemia separate from hypermagnesemia and knowing the differences between hypo and hyperkalemia. Those are the things that most people struggle with. So it's usually more helpful at this point to not just take a quiz on hypokalemia, but you can see at the bottom right here, want to quiz more broadly, select below. So this is where you want to kind of go in and say, I want something on electrolyte disturbances. And you can see it popped up from 2 questions to 18 questions. Instead of 25 flashcards, 112 flashcards. So this is where I would say, yeah, I'd love to add 112 flashcards to my queue, but I don't want to add the questions just yet. Let's say I'm just kind of focused on flashcards, but not questions, because I don't have the confidence to even answer questions. I'll say, yeah, I want to confirm I'm adding these flashcards, and watch my queue in the top right. It goes from 52, it's going to pop up, so to 122. So basically, that's what happens when you, and then let's just say I want to add these questions. That'll go up there and pump it up to 23. So the reason that it added fewer than you would have expected is because 5 questions were already in my queue. So I added just 13 more. So it's great, right? It's keeping track of the questions I'm adding, not adding duplicates. It's making sure that the flashcards I'm adding, again, aren't adding duplicates. And it's doing this automatically. So ultimately what I want to do is just kind of get in the habit of watching what I have up in here in the top right and doing my daily job. My daily job is kind of this little clock. And my due today is 71 flashcards. So it's telling me, hey, I've got a bunch of flashcards I need to get through them today. And usually around that 3 to 5 month window, you should be ready to do this level of work. Around 50 to 100 flashcards a day should be no sweat. So you just get in that habit of just kind of building your muscle memory and getting stronger and stronger and building your stamina, frankly, to answering this many questions. So that's kind of that window, which is, again, 3 to 5 months out. So let's say you've done this. I'm just going to back up. You've kind of taken your little meandering tour through the content. You've identified key areas that you're really weak at. You've been drilling yourself on it. You're now kind of feeling ready to take some exams, to kind of really get prepped up and gear up for that last and very important 1 to 2 months. This is where, at this point, you want to start kind of creating a study plan. So what you can do is you can add tools. You can see all these different tools that we have, private and teamwork spaces, and there's a step one schedule. So I'm just going to add that in. And when I do that, it's going to populate the one that I had before. So you'll have to tolerate that just for a second. I'm just going to renew it. So this is the one I had set up, but let me create a new one. So I'm going to create a new one. So it says create your schedule for step one. And it's very clear, right? So most commonly used resources are UWorld, First Aid, and Pathoma. Any extra resources that I want to add, I can do that, which is pretty sweet. And I can also add quick links to Picmonic, Sketchy Medical, and Osmosis videos. So let's get started. So when do I want to take step one? I'm just going to say 2 months out. So today is August 22nd. So let's say I'm taking step one October 23rd. So it says, do I want to start reviewing today? Yep, I want to start schedule today. I've got 62 days, pretty sweet. What version of First Aid? Well, I have the 2017 version, let's say. Am I still in classes? Nope, I'm studying full-time for step one. Are there any specific days I want off, like for religious purposes? I'm going to say no, but you could, of course, click yes, and you could figure out what days those are. And I want to study on weekends as well as weekdays. Honestly, I studied both weekends and weekdays when I took step one, so I'm going to say the same here. Are there any specific weeks I want to leave unscheduled? Nope, I'm pretty much just studying right now. There's no spring break. UWorld subscription, let's say yes, I've started it. How many UWorld questions do I have left to complete? I'm just going to say 2,400, and I want to do them twice, which is recommended. So I'm going to click yes. Do I have a preference for what days of the week to reserve for full-length exams? I personally love to take full-length exams on weekends. I feel like it's much more relaxing. I have a nice schedule, so I like to do them on weekends. So it says you're all set. Click here below to get your schedule. So I'm going to do that. And it's going to generate a day-by-day schedule, which for someone like me is super helpful because I really like to take the work out of having to figure out what I'm doing that day. So it says Tuesday, August 22nd, today's goals. So I'm going to do a first pass of UWorld, 53 questions, and I can, when I say that it's done, I can say it's either complete, I can return to it later, I can ignore it completely, I can say, you know what, I don't want to do that, forget it. So I'm going to say I did my 53 questions. I can add a custom goal. I can add in my own goal if I want, in terms of which question bank I want to use. I can title it, number of questions I want to do. So don't feel like you can only, just use UWorld. Let's say you want to do Kaplan or something else. You can do that. And then today it's telling me I need to focus on biochemistry. And so it's putting me through a bunch of DNA, RNA, and cell physiology content. And you can see this, it's a lot, right? So it's a lot of flashcards. It's a lot of first aid pages that I need to cover as well. So it tells me exactly which first aid pages cover that material in the edition that I have. So I need to look over these 4 pages and I can say, yep, I just did that, maybe before breakfast and 29 flashcards. And then let's say I eat breakfast. I forgot my DNA stuff. This probably brought me to lunch. And so then I can say, okay, after lunch I need to do this. And now it's mid-afternoon and I go through that. And now it's kind of 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And at this point, I'm getting kind of exhausted. I need to just kind of relax. Maybe I watch a few Picmonics, watch some videos, and then I call it a day around 7 or 8 o'clock. So you can see it literally guides your day, which is pretty sweet. And it also tells you kind of what tomorrow is going to be about, right? So tomorrow it's going to start out the same way. I've got questions, and I can do it in whatever order I want. I can kind of go and do these things first and then go back and do this. So it's completely up to me. And I can also start editing my timeline. I can say, you know what, this isn't exactly how I want to do it. I'd rather spend actually a third day in biochemistry because that's really hard for me. And frankly, microbiology, I feel like that's pretty easy. Just do 5 days of that and maybe an extra day of hemonc because I always struggle with lymphomas and leukemias. And the rest of this looks pretty good. And so I'm just going to leave it as is. So I can kind of mix and match things. First dedicated pass, second pass. I can say, okay, how do I want to do it the second time through? Exam days, I can kind of plug that in. Remember, I wanted to take my exams on a weekend, so that's why I defaulted to that. And days off. Remember, I said I didn't want to do any days off, but I can always add some if I want. Maybe there's a birthday I forgot about. So this is a really nice, kind of really solid study outline that literally lets you kind of play right through all the content you want. And remember, you might be thinking, how does this apply to COMLEX? With COMLEX, there are certain books like Savarese, which people are really, really kind of wedded to, and those are great textbooks. You can do kind of the same thing and put in your custom goals for Savarese. You could say, I want to read X pages or read certain chapters out of it to make sure I cover that content as well. So don't feel like you can't adapt this to your own situation. You can certainly do that. And many of these kind of resources are going to cover, content related to stuff relevant to a DO student as well. So we have fantastic questions that are specific for COMLEX. We have flashcards that make sense for COMLEX as well. So all of that kind of stuff is available, and you can mix and match and make that basically to your liking. So in the top right is a little summary of what the topics are, where you could find them, and you can kind of decide to show everything or just show the stuff that's not completed if you want to clean it up, or just the stuff that's completed if you want to kind of feel good about what you're up to. So this is basically how it's set up. I'm going to just kind of quickly browse through the 3 versions then of how you'd go from kind of nothing to getting to this point. But that's essentially where you're at. And finally, by the time you're kind of one day out, going back to our previous discussion, that's when you should be feeling really confident. You've gone through, you've done your first aid, you've done your UWorld, you've done your osmosis questions and flashcards, you've looked at the relevant Picmonics and Sketchy Medical videos. You should be pretty confident with taking the exam. And again, it's all about practicing the questions. I can't stress that enough. As you do more and more of these questions, like these ones that I showed you earlier, you're going to feel better and better about them. So again, these little stems, each one of them has a pearl. And as you kind of click around and say, look, I don't know what this is, but let's say I think it's hypercalcemia or hypophosphatemia. Let's say I have no clue. It's going to say, okay, hypophosphatemia, here's the key takeaway, here's the main explanation. And then I want you to really kind of force yourself to kind of go through these wrong answer explanations when you're not feeling like you know it for sure, and then identify what it is about the stem that you change. So that's just recapping some of the bullet points. Let me now kind of zoom back out, and I'm going to pull up for you one last thing, which is these bonus tips. Again, kind of take care of yourself. And if you're kind of watching this webinar and you're looking to use osmosis, there's an extra 20% off. There's a deal going on through the end of August, and I want to kind of make you aware of it. This is the web link. You can kind of click on that and go to get that discount applied to your purchase right now. When you start using osmosis, if you find anything difficult or confusing, or you're not sure how to make it work for you, we have an awesome team of folks that are basically standing by to kind of help you and guide you through the process. And you can say, look, I'm 3 months out. In Rishi's webinar, he mentioned, making a step schedule, or he mentioned kind of being able to add questions to my queue. How do I do that? So you can kind of ask those questions, and there's a whole team of folks that can kind of help you get set up. So that's essentially how I would walk through and take that test if I was in your shoes. And ultimately gets back to kind of that one slide that I had about setting your goal. This is all about kind of getting through that next stage of taking the step or taking COMLEX, so that you can go into residency and feel confident. A lot of this information, if you learn it the right way, it sticks with you. And what I don't want to have happen is for you to kind of cram. This would be the worst situation, for you to cram for 2 weeks or 3 weeks for the exam, take the exam, and frankly, regardless of whether you do well or not, that information is just very unlikely to stay with you. And that's what all the data suggests. So there's no point in spending all that time and effort learning all this stuff if you're not going to learn it for real. And I want you to learn it authentically. And so if you learn it the right way, it is a lot harder. It's a lot tougher to kind of create these good habits, but it pays huge dividends when you're taking care of patients. So I'll end there. I welcome you guys to meet me in Intercom, which is our communication system. Once you've purchased, or send us a message. Good luck with the exam, and remember to do your power poses. Best of luck, guys. Take care.